So, welcome to the Real God #4 Real People podcast. I'm with my big bro D to the Anthony, jumping on the pod with us. You want to
Going
introduce
on.
yourself to the folks?
Yeah, what's going on, man? Yeah, me and Shot Shy go back, man, and one of the
Yeah,
first brothers I actually met, now when I moved to Atlanta. But
yeah,
so
man.
yeah, glad to be on, man. Just the discussion for today is kind of right in my wheelhouse, and so
hmm
my background is of course is mental health, clinical mental health, and
hmm
very passionate also about the areas of pastoral care,
Yep.
and just kind of bridging the gap between the two.
Yep. Nah, Big Bro has been one of those ones that I have been grateful to be able to call friend, but also to be able to call brother, where like the goal in pastoral care or counseling really is to help a person just like the church make their next step. But sometimes there's things that we're going through that require a little bit more under the hood work in order to support them in actually serving the Lord well. And so one of the pods we wanted to talk about briefly, because D'Anthony has his own practice on the clinical side, and I'm currently pursuing the pastoral counseling on the ministry side, is just how do we work with folks to actually be able to move past trauma from a biblical standpoint, but even sometimes a clinical standpoint, because I think the space where the church has realized we haven't served well is simply by with good intention saying, hey man, we're gonna pray and we're gonna believe in God and just leaving it at that. When at sometimes folks need to be able to have somewhat of a sounding board or somewhat of an affirmation, hey, what you've experienced was not common and it's okay to feel a certain way about how you've experienced these things, but how do we move forward, right? And so one of the questions I had from a big bro was, hey, how does a person's past really play a role into how they move as an adult, even in our daily lives, right? So what you got? What you think?
Man, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I guess it starts with just understanding, just the nature of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
know it's something that we all talk about,
Yep.
but I think a lot of times people there's some misconceptions to it.
Mm-hmm.
There are different elements of trauma, if you will. So, for instance, just to name a few, you have like historical trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You have transgenerational trauma. That people typically hold on to for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You also you know when you look at trauma on this spectrum, you start to see it as, is the goal really to get past it, right?
Yeah.
Trauma
Yeah.
is any event or situation that is overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
that a person lacks the internal resources, be
Yep.
that emotional, spiritual, mental,
Mm-hmm.
physical. They
Mm-hmm.
lack the resources in order to overcome that
Yep.
particular situation or event.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the nature of it. And so when you look at that, yeah, it's helping people to get past it is also helping them. The starting point should be acknowledging it and
Mm-hmm.
understanding it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We spend a lot of times, and I can say the same thing even apply. This would be a conversation for a different time. It applies to
Yep.
suicide. It's
Yep.
one of those things where you look at suicide, you say, well, hey, how do we get past this?
Yeah.
Suicidality is not something that we get past. Neither is
Mm-hmm.
trauma. It's something that
Mm-hmm.
we have to learn to understand.
That's it. No, that's it. Like the
Yeah.
way I look at it too is like you put it in the realms of suicide. I even can put it into the realms, and I think you would agree, of certain levels of sexuality or sexual abuse, right? If your first exposure to intimacy or sexual intimacy is not one that's biblical, and then you now are learning outside of the realms of scripture, and then now you're putting it into practice before anyone actually gave you any resources there or knowledge base, then now when the church comes in to play a role in kind
Sure.
of help with you with that sanctification, now that you made this choice, you're battling really your old mistress, really was the first exposure you had to it. And I think sometimes as a church body, we can actually be a little unfair because we're expecting them to make this jump past how they were exposed to it to now how we want them to receive it and move forward. And we'll kind of just say, well, you just need to trust in God, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And
Mhm.
but it's like, man, a person only knows what they know. Like if I tell you my dad never taught me how to change my oil in my car, And you say, "What do you got? YouTube?" That's fine. It's still not the same as your dad taking you under the car, showing you how to put the jack up, showing you how to let the car heat up, and then
That's right.
taking the bolts off, letting all of the oil drain out before you get the oil cap and the filter and put the filter in, and then close everything up and then put the oil in. Like, there's little nuances that I think folks don't realize that come from upbringing that sometimes we probably can't fully help them recover. We're helping them to cope. Does that seem fair?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely, and that's kind of what what we get at, especially
Mm-hmm.
from from a clinical standpoint.
Yep.
Yeah, you diagnose trauma,
Mm-hmm.
which the two types of trauma that you see in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the DSM-5, is
Mm-hmm.
what most clinical therapists use, or
Okay.
psychiatrists uses. Post traumatic stress disorder or
Mm-hmm.
acute stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Trauma, from a clinical sense, is a disruption.
Mm-hmm.
It's a disruption. It disrupts a kind of a normal process
Mm-hmm.
of development, a normal process of living.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about some of our collective traumas,
Mm-hmm.
COVID-19,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
disruption.
Yep.
September, 9/11,
Yep.
disruption.
Yep.
Mass shootings or school shootings, it's a disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that what maintains trauma is that inability to know, like, how do I live forward
Mm-hmm.
having gone through this particular disruption.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do I want to get on an airplane again?
Mm-hmm.
Do I ever want to take my mask off again?
Yep.
Do I ever want to allow myself to trust any sense of normalcy,
Yep.
again? And to your point, when you look at the nature of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and like the example you gave in terms of like sexual abuse,
Mm-hmm.
do I ever want to trust other men?
Yep.
Do I ever want to trust other women?
Mm-hmm.
Because what would be a normal interpersonal, dynamic or connection,
Yep.
started with this particular disruption.
Mm-hmm.
We have the ability as humans, I believe, to repress trauma,
Mm-hmm.
to
I think we do.
tuck it away, because the God saw fit when He created us,
Mm-hmm.
neurologically, to put the flight or fight part of our brain
Yep.
next door to what we call the hippocampal part of our brain,
Which is
which stores
emotions.
memory.
Oh man. Okay.
Right. And so it stores memory. And so we have within our own minds, like, whenever I recall an experience,
Mm-hmm.
it is directly next door to the thing that caused me to get anxious,
Anxious.
or
Yep.
to get fearful, or
Yep.
to want to run.
Yep.
And that's the survival mechanism of our brain. So
Mm-hmm.
when we look at symptoms from a clinical standpoint, really the brain is doing
Trying to
what
do.
the body is telling it,
Yep.
right? Or the
Yep.
body is doing what the brain is telling it, in some sense. And so it's doing its job.
Yep. Yep.
What hadn't happened, Shad, is the restoration.
That's it. That's it.
Is the restoration. And if we look at, let's look at biblically, like
Mm-hmm.
his history of our ancestor, of the Israelites. Look at all of the things that we've gone through,
Yep.
and we see the results
Mm-hmm.
of what happened. And this is more like from a pastoral care standpoint. You
Sure.
see the results, like what happened. Like what happened, there was a fall.
Mm-hmm.
We sinned against God. We
Yep.
became sinful people all
Mm-hmm.
throughout biblical history.
It almost
I'm
seems
going
like sin is the disruption of how God originally ordained it.
It is the spiritual trauma,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
right? It's the spiritual trauma, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so at our core, it
Mm-hmm.
is it's like soul trauma
Uh-huh.
for us, in
That's
some
it.
sense.
That's
I
it.
might have made that up, but that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
like soul trauma. And until something happens,
Mm-hmm.
that allows me to feel restored,
Mm-hmm.
to feel renewed, to
Mm-hmm.
feel different, I'm unable to walk.
Nope.
Like I'm in prison. I'm defined by it.
Yep. Yep.
It consumes me. It overwhelms me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the results of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I.e., I'm anxious. I'm paranoid. I don't know. My connections with other people are kind of messed up. I'm
Mm-hmm.
unplugged. I'm not in community.
Mm-hmm.
That's the results of trauma,
Of trauma.
whether that's spiritual
Yeah.
trauma, soul trauma, mental trauma, collective trauma,
Mm-hmm.
generational trauma.
Yep.
It disrupted me, and therefore I live my life a certain way as a result of that.
Yep.
The part that we never really get to, and the part that that we're offered in our Christian faith and our Christian walk
Mm-hmm.
that I think even as a clinical therapist lacks, this piece of course is not in clinical
Yep.
therapy as it should be,
Yep.
is the remedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the remedy,
Mm-hmm.
right? The remedy as we see it, of course, is Jesus Christ.
That's it. Yep.
That's the remedy because that's what says he meets us in the disruption
Yep.
and says, I took on this for you so that you can
Mm-hmm.
handle the things that you've gone through. You can deal with so many times throughout biblical history. The woman with the issue of blood,
Get out
disruption.
my head.
There was a remedy,
There
right?
was.
There was a remedy.
Yep.
The
Yep.
woman at the well, the Samaritan woman,
Mm-hmm.
there was a remedy.
Yep. Yep. And even in that remedy, we see Christ deals with the trauma by presenting something that she believes is the solution to the trauma. And it helps her understand, hey, before you get the solution, we got to deal with the problem. He tells them literally, yo, you want this water that's everlasting so you don't drink again. And I think she even starts figuring out this is more than just physical water.
Exactly.
Hey, bring me your husband. And she's like, come on now. Come on.
Hmm.
Come on now. Like, you really got to put my business out there like that.
Right.
But Christ is like, no. Don't think we're going to deal with you're going to give you the promise or the solution without first
Exactly.
getting to the root. Because if I give this to you without you actually having a process to frame this in, you're going to
Right.
actually lose the promise that I'm trying to give you because you don't have a structure or a vessel to keep it in. And I think
Exactly.
that's almost a part of like the counseling space is, hey, let me work on the vessel and the root so that you really can start living out like the promise or living past the trauma that you've experienced because God never designed that for you. But
Exactly.
no, I'm with you, big bro. I'm with you.
It's so powerful, man. One of the tools that I use, Shad, is, and I can, send it to you,
Yeah, yeah.
if you're interested, man. I use this thing called the trauma tree.
Mm-hmm,
And I use it especially when I'm doing pastoral counseling, because what I want to show them is basically the illustration kind of suggests like at the roots, like there are some root issues
mm-hmm,
that have happened in our lives,
mm-hmm,
whether that's rejection, molestation,
mm-hmm,
abandonment, neglect, some root issues that happen. And as a result of those roots, it creates kind of like a tree
mm-hmm.
bark of falsehoods,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we become inauthentic, because of these
Yep.
things. Normalcy is disrupted. And so now it's almost like I'm on a different path,
Mm-hmm.
on a different emotionally and spiritually. It kind of sets me on a different path.
Yep.
And as a result of that, we develop these particular falsehoods
Mm-hmm.
in ways of dealing with the pain,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're not living, we're coping.
That's it.
We're not living, we're
Mm-hmm.
coping, and that's where you see porn addictions,
Yep.
gambling addictions. That's where you see,
Mm-hmm.
workaholism, and even just pursuing, just this person who always in school forever,
Yep.
like just degree
Yep.
out. I mean, you
Like an
see
achievement
way,
addiction almost. Yep. Yep.
yeah, putting layer. It's
Yep.
just layers of pain
Mm-hmm.
that sits right above, those
Mm-hmm.
roots, and then above that you just develop this. You grow into this tree of just falsehoods
Yep.
because of what you told yourself.
Yep.
And at the top, what do you get? You get fruits,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But from if we look at from roots to fruits,
Mm-hmm.
these are the kind of fruits that are like isolation,
Mm-hmm.
suicide,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
divorce, domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times people, they see the fruits of their lives, but they don't understand the
Roots.
roots of it.
Ooh.
And we got a Christ, man, who he just didn't deal with he
Mm-mm.
just didn't deal with the fruits. To your point with the lady, like, yeah, maybe the fruit was I'm here alone at a well
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to get water, but Jesus was like, nah. But what about these roots though?
Them roots, yo. Yo.
Let's get at that. So
I think like where, and that was one of the questions we had, like where I think sometimes we miss at the church level is, hey, we immediately want to get to the fruit without taking the time to understand the root. Like saying to someone who has lost someone or struggles with commitment or struggles with
hmm
like value, saying to
hmm
them God loves you without understanding maybe even their family dynamics first
hmm
or their viewpoint on love. Maybe they feel like love comes with a catch. Like you
right.
say this, but it always came with a catch when I was younger. then we don't fully understand. It's difficult to even use that terminology with that person. Their outlook on simple things like love is not
Sure.
biblical, right?
Yeah.
But what's your thoughts,
You
big
can
bro?
you can say it. Their outlook on those things that are of God are
Mm-hmm.
disrupted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Trust, love, commitment,
Mm-hmm.
consistency. Their outlook on fruits of the spirit, like anything that allows them those elements that allow them to actually be in community and in fellowship
Mm-hmm.
are disrupted.
Yep.
And then later on transfer to their actual faith to
Yep.
God. Well, now I just kind of I define God based on my perceptions of the trauma or the things that have happened to me.
Yep.
How could God allow? How could this happen?
Yep.
How could you know allow this person to do this to me, or
Mm-hmm.
allow this person to do this to me? He doesn't author any of trauma.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
And because in its more simpler sense, trauma is also loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's lost,
Yeah.
and it's lost. And there was never supposed to be any sense of lostness
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to our walk and our relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a loss of identity. It's a loss of relationship. We understand that as sinful people,
Mm-hmm.
it's a loss of fellowship.
That's it. That's it.
And if sin first and foremost created a loss or a disruption of fellowship,
Mm-hmm.
then it trickles down from that. And we look at
Mm-hmm.
any trauma you can think of, Rashad, anything that you have heard have ever happened to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to just deal with the loss that occurred, just say, what was the loss? What did you lose
Mm-hmm.
as a result
Mm-hmm.
of that trauma? And just start there. And that will set you into a place of at least knowing where I needed to be found. Because if
Yeah.
I don't even know where the loss
You
happened,
don't know where to start.
I'm not sure where to start, and I'm not sure
Yeah.
where I need Christ to find me, right?
Yeah.
Where I need His love, and He's shown that He's willing to do that. He
Yep.
will come where you are, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's that. But that I think that simplifies sometimes very
Hmm.
complex issues. Like I was reading a book. It's talking about like giving solution focused pastoral counseling. So it's a way of giving like therapy that's making the individual the subject matter expert on their trauma, but also
Right.
then walking alongside them to see not only how we apply biblical concepts to support them, but also how we get them to the point where they're independent in their coping mechanisms and addressing like their triggers. But what it makes me think of is sometimes, especially from a pastoral standpoint, we got this deep desire to always have the right answer to the person who's experiencing tragedy, loss, or some
Right.
level of trauma. And sometimes the person just needs to be heard and maybe just affirm, man, that was a really tough situation. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
what do you feel like you just said, what do you feel like you lost the most that you did not expect?
Hmm.
Okay. What would be the ideal space later on in which you feel
Hmm.
like you would be able to gain some of that back before you go to
Hmm.
meet Jesus? Because I'm not going to sit here and say if you lost something like your virginity in some type of
Hmm.
traumatic space that you can gain that back. But what I can
Sure.
say is there is redemption and gospel, I mean, in hope for you later on in marriage if we're able to address what it is you feel like you lost, right? And I
Exactly.
think, but I feel like we miss that because we always want to have this silver bullet because it makes us look like we're the greatest pastor to ever walk the face of the earth. But but I feel like what may help folks who are walking alongside folks, and I love your take on that is like what are some possible stages someone who is walking alongside someone that's struggling with past trauma and have tried to figure it out on their own but haven't gotten there from
Hmm.
a clinical and even maybe a little bit of a pastoral standpoint. What are some stages that a person listening that serves could support someone that's struggling with trauma and past loss?
Absolutely. I mean, from a clinical standpoint, we have to understand that trauma is there's different like we said, there's different elements
Mm-hmm,
to it.
mm-hmm,
first in understanding like what are the elements to the type of
Yeah.
trauma that this person
Okay.
experienced, right? You said, like with someone who's been sexually abused. Well, that with that trauma, there's going to come very particular
Yeah.
elements, and one aspect of that could be
Yeah. Yeah.
shame,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, is this person really dealing with shame? And so what? Because there's what happened, and then there's what the person told themselves about what
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
right? Um, when we look at kind of the example, like let's look at Katrina, for
Mm-hmm.
example. I don't think there's any particular
Mm-hmm.
shame that's connected to that because it was a more collective type of
Yeah.
trauma
With
or
her too.
situation. But nonetheless, when I've gone down and I've talked to victims about that, you see this sense of fear or this sense of like, man, my whole world is gone, my whole life is
Mm-hmm.
gone,
Mm-hmm.
right? You see this
Mm-hmm.
mistrust. I can't trust
Mm-hmm.
anymore. So anytime we see somebody who's experienced something traumatic, there's what happened, and then there's this story that they start to tell themselves about what
Mm-hmm.
happened, because that trauma in itself makes this attempt to
Mm-hmm.
integrate now into this person's life, and from a neurological sense, it's just really nestled into a part of the brain, that says we don't want this to really happen
Mm-hmm.
again, or we don't want to put ourselves in a situation
Yep.
where I might get hurt, or I might get abused, or I might lose, or I might
Yep.
this. And so, you know, dealing with the story rather than the situation
Mm-hmm.
sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
because they could be far removed from the actual
Yep.
situation, but the story lives
Okay.
on, right? The story lives on. At 5 years old, it happened, and here we are, like at 40, and I still tell myself that it's not safe to be
Mm-hmm.
around certain types of
Yep.
people.
Yep.
And that's what we have to meet them. We have to meet them in the
Okay.
story.
Okay. So
You
start
know,
with getting the
sometimes we
story.
want to, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. We, like you said earlier, sometimes people want to be like, superheroes, and they want to rescue them from, that particular
Mm-hmm.
situation. You know, but God didn't call us to
Mm-hmm.
rescue that. He called us to be,
Mm-hmm.
counselors, to be support, and to be able to.
And you can also find our podcast on most major music platforms or podcast platforms like iHeartRadio, Spotify, or Apple Music. Y'all have a blessed one, and I can't wait to jump back into this next week. Talk to you soon.